I hope you enjoyed last week's episode regarding creatures in caves. This week, we're turning our attention back to listener stories, and tonight's reoccurring theme seems to focus heavily on spirits. So as I always say, sit back and make yourself comfortable as we share these listeners' bizarre experiences with you.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7-8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Nick Ryan, and this is episode 39. Before we get started with today's show, I'd like to thank Robin, Cassandra, Courtney, and Julie for supporting the show via Patreon. We truly appreciate your help with keeping the show up and running. Tonight's first story comes from Skylar, and Skylar calls their experience Demonic Animal. Skylar says, "Hello, Nick. I just recently found your podcast on Spotify a few days ago. My story is sort of related to sleep paralysis, but I haven't heard any stories that are like mine. It happened about 2 years ago. I remember waking up hearing a kitten meowing. The meows were everywhere. After about 15 seconds of this, I saw a small shadow, about 6 inches tall and about 1.5 feet long. Basically, it looked like the size of a cat. My bed is diagonal to my door. Our family doesn't have any pets, so I was sort of curious and a little freaked out, because usually a cat won't dart into a house unless they are chasing something or they're scared. About 40 seconds after I woke up, I saw the small shadow enter my room pretty fast. I remember it looked like a cat, but without the eyes or face, but it had the tail and ears. The demonic animal is what I'm going to call it, because it was like a shimmering shadow, or like it was covered with black fire. The only thing I can relate this thing to is the Pokemon Ponyta. The Pokemon has its mane and hair made out of fire. This entity was covered with flickering, shimmering flames. This is pretty hard to describe. I'm sorry if it's long, but this thing ran into the room meowing. But at this point it was deeper, so it didn't sound like an actual cat. It ran into my room and jumped on my chest and hissed and growled at me. The growl didn't sound like any animals I've ever heard. Thank you for your time, Nick." Definitely unlike any story I've heard before. Our next story comes from Jesse in South Australia. Jesse calls their experience Ghost or Entity. Jesse says, "Hello, I found your podcast on Spotify a few days ago, and have listened to every episode and thought I'd share an experience I had whilst living in Canada. I was visiting my girlfriend, who had said in the past she had seen paintings swinging and hearing noises upstairs. We were going to sleep one night, and I thought I heard footsteps. She assured me it was nothing and not to worry. I tried to get back to sleep, but noises continued, making me jump up to look around. Knocks on the walls, footsteps, unclear voices, whispering, and something being knocked over. At this point I had become upset and frightened by the noises. I once again tried to get back to sleep when I heard 3 very quick footsteps run up to the side of the bed, making me jump up again out of fear. After looking around the room, I went to lay back down and turned my face to my girlfriend. As I was turning to her, she was leaning toward me to kiss me goodnight, but all I saw was a pale, demonic face coming quickly toward me. I screamed and started crying by what I had seen. I had scared my girlfriend, who sat up to comfort me, not knowing what had scared me. After I had calmed down, we moved our mattress to another room, because neither of us could sleep, and the room felt like it had a presence. Her mother cleansed the room that night to get rid of any negative spirits. I returned to Australia for 7 months, in which my girlfriend didn't return to that room. When I came back, I stayed for 2 years, and every time I went in that room, until the day we left. We agreed that the atmosphere in that room felt off to the rest of the house, and we never felt comfortable being in there. More specifically, was the closet of that room. I always felt uneasy when looking at it, which I did every time I went in there, and hated needing to look for something in it, and tried to do it as quickly as possible. It just felt like something bad was in there. I thought it wasn't related to anything demonic, but my girlfriend did have a bag of sticks, feathers, beads, and other things she had collected at a horse camp she went to where her and her peers had experiences seeing ghostly horse figures and hearing phantom horse stampedes run directly past them. Until now, I'd always chalked it up to my brain playing tricks on me, as I had never had any ghostly encounters before, and ghost horses don't really come off as a negative energy, but maybe it was something. I haven't had any experiences since then, besides sleep paralysis, which I have experienced since I was a young teen. Thank you for taking the time to read my experiences. I apologize if it was long, and I'd love to hear what you think about it, and keep up the awesome work. Jesse. Our next story comes from Ivy in Arizona. Ivy calls her experience Ghost. Ivy says, I've had a few experiences in my life, but the first ones were the most terrifying, and it was when my family and I moved into an apartment in Arizona. When I was 13 years old, my parents decided to move to Phoenix, Arizona. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Phoenix. During the move, it was my father and I in the apartment unpacking. I was in the bathroom in the hall unpacking some boxes when, in my peripheral vision, I saw a dark figure walk by. I yelled for my dad, thinking it might have been him who walked by, but no one responded. I went outside to see my dad and asked him if he was just inside, to which he said no. I told him that I thought I saw someone walk by, so he proceeded to go inside and look around. He came out a few minutes later and said no one was inside, and it was probably just my imagination. My dad has always been very skeptical and has never believed in the existence of anything paranormal, and thinks everything has to have a logical explanation. Anyway, I put the whole incident aside and forgot about it. Weeks went by without any occurrences, until one morning I awoke to a girl standing on the edge of my bed. I couldn't see her face, but I could see her short hair, white spaghetti-strap tank top, and denim shorts. But there was a black cloud covering her face. For a slight second, I had thought that it was my cousin, who sometimes would come over with my aunt, until I glanced over at the clock and saw that it was around 4 a.m. in the morning. When I looked back at the edge of my bed, she was no longer there. I ran to my mom's room, terrified, and told her what I had seen, and I slept on the floor in their bedroom for the next 2 or 3 weeks, because I refused to go back in my room. Finally, after some weeks, I mustered up the courage to go back and sleep in my room again, and tried not to think of the little girl I had seen. Again, weeks went by with no incident, and finally I was starting to go back to my normal routine again. Occasionally, you'd get a sensation I can't quite explain, almost as if something was watching you and feeling uneasy. I never felt alone in this apartment. You always felt someone with you, and even now, have never felt that again. It was almost like someone was behind you, watching you. One day I had gotten home early from school, and my mom had gone out on an errand, so I decided to stay behind and take a nap. I went into my room and laid down, when I heard heavy breathing right behind me. I held my breath, thinking it could be me, but I heard it again. I have never in my entire life experienced a paralyzing feeling quite like this. Now I knew what people meant when they say that they froze in fear. That expression is extremely true, and undoubtedly that. My mind was rushing with images of what I might see if I was to turn around, but at the same time I couldn't move even if I wanted to turn around. I was frozen. I was so scared. The breathing got closer, and I was frozen in fear to what seemed like to be an eternity. I yelled and started crying. I laid there in a ball until my mother got home, and again, Mother's floor became my bed. Both my parents thought I might have an overactive imagination and didn't know if they could believe me, which I understand, but I was sure of what I had seen and heard. This is what happened to my mother. One morning while I was in school, my mom was sleeping, and she said something tugged on her legs hard enough to where she woke up from her sleep. She woke up terrified, enough to go to my aunt's house in her pajamas, and she stayed there until we got out of school, and my dad arrived home. She finally believed me. My father was thinking my mother and I had both gone mad, and that my mom was letting my experiences scare her. That wasn't the case, and there was so much more to this apartment. I experienced 2 more incidents. One, luckily, I got to share with my mom, that in a weird way made me feel at ease, because I finally knew it wasn't my active imagination. My mother and I were watching a movie in the living room when we heard a woman sobbing outside on the back porch. We both peeked out the window, but there was nothing there. We heard it again, and it sounded as if it was right next to the back window, but we couldn't see anything. Finally, after a minute or 2, it stopped, and we were both left wondering what it was. My last experience happened again in my room. I woke up in the middle of the night, and at this point, after everything I had seen and heard, I would now leave the light on in the bathroom, so my room wasn't so dark. I looked into the bathroom and saw my dad's reflection in the mirror, but he wasn't in front of it. His eyes were pitch black, and he was dressed as if he was going out to a party. I yelled for my mom and dad, and they both came into my room, and I told them what I had seen. Not long after that, we moved into a new apartment, and my experiences stopped. I still wonder what energy was trapped in this apartment, and why I was the only one that saw most of it. I wonder if the people who moved into this apartment after us experienced anything. I wonder if something bad happened there. I just know for a fact it was something evil. I'll never know what happened there, but I know what I saw. My father has now had his own paranormal experience, and is now not so skeptical. After all this, I became incredibly interested in the paranormal, and now I love reading and hearing about it. I just wanted to share my story with you and say thank you for what you do, and let you know I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I hope you keep making episodes on the paranormal, because I myself enjoy listening to them on my commutes. Thank you for reading, and have a great day. Ivy. Our next story comes to us from Holly, and Holly has a 2-part story. Holly says, "Hi Nick, I just got into your podcast on a really long drive, and I listened to pretty much all of your episodes. I've had a lot of familiar experiences to other listeners, but there's 2 instances that came to the forefront of my mind with an intensity that I had to pull over to catch my breath. Let me preface this 2-part story with the fact that I am open-minded and a believer in the paranormal. Having heritage on both the Celtic and Native American side, I feel very vulnerable around paranormal activity. I don't really talk to anyone about what I experience, so here goes. About 2 years ago, I was with my now ex-boyfriend. We were house/barn sitting for his parents as they were out of town for about 2 weeks. Now, we lived in western New York, in a super small farm town. The house his parents owned was a carriage house on a long coach line, and at one point was believed to be part of the Underground Railroad, as we were pretty close to the Canadian border. Most of the house was all original, with a few additions to accommodate the growing family. My ex was extremely sensitive to the paranormal, and had had many experiences, especially on his parents' property. When the first experience happened, we were sleeping in the newest addition on the house, which had one of those sliding track solid doors. We had been drinking, both of us just turned 21, but decided it was time to go to bed, so we could get up early to milk the cows. I remember being fast asleep and waking up for pretty much no reason. I remember opening my eyes and looking toward the door, only to watch it open slowly and hearing it scrape on the track. Now, I have pretty bad eyesight, so without my glasses I normally can only see blobby-like shapes. Thinking his family had come home early, I quickly put my glasses on and looked back at the door. I only saw a blacker-than-black shadow with a tall, wide-brimmed hat. I remember thinking something along the lines of, "That's odd," and then falling back asleep with my glasses still on. The next time I stayed at the house, about 3 days later, my ex and I had decided to sleep in a different, warmer room in the old house. He left his 120-pound Mastiff downstairs, tied up within the reach of plenty of food and water. The dog had his own room in the house, but it didn't have a door, and he could be destructive if left alone for too long. I remember crawling into bed, pulling the blankets up to my ears, and falling deeply and quickly to sleep. I remember waking up to a low rumbling sound, and since thunderstorms are pretty common where I'm from, I didn't think much of it. I rolled over and hung my arm off the edge of the bed, and nearly jumped out of my skin when the dog licked my hand. I distinctly remembered hooking his leash and closing our door. How did he get in? I leaned over the edge of the bed and looked at the dog, noticing his collar was still on, so he hadn't slipped it off. I didn't think much of it. The end of his leash was only tied with a safety knot, in case he needed to be untied quickly. I figured he'd done it himself. I rolled over and went back into a light doze. The next time I woke up was because there was a light shining in my face. I remember thinking that there was no way the sun is up. It's like 4 a.m. I rolled over and noticed our door was wide open, and something was standing in it, blocking out the hall light we had left on to get to the bathroom. I remember seeing red eyes, a top hat, or like a stovepipe hat, and a gentleman in coattails. He smiled at me, but not evilly. He sat down on the edge of the bed and tucked the blanket back around me. The dog put his head on the entity's leg, but didn't seem too worried. I just shut my eyes and fell back asleep, and didn't wake up again until after sunrise. Oh, and when we looked at the dog's leash the next morning, it hadn't been untied, cut, or broken in any way. It had been unclipped. All of my research has told me it's the Hat Man, but I was never stricken with the fear like everyone else says they have. I have so many more stories to share, from Bigfoot to Thunderbirds to ghosts and spirits. I love the show, and I can't wait to finish the rest of the episodes. Thanks for reading, and I'm sorry this was so long. Thanks. I reached out to Holly, and she shared one of her Bigfoot experiences with us. This is her second story. Holly says, "There's one Bigfoot encounter I've had that still sends chills down my spine. Still living in Western New York, I was probably 13 when this happened, so 12-ish years ago. I'm an avid hiker and nature lover, and one of my obsessions at that age was endurance riding, which is taking your horse on miles of riding through some tough terrain. The only rough terrain we had was a well-groomed path through the woods under some high-voltage power lines, but it was pretty and went through the woods and cornfields for miles. One Saturday afternoon, probably early September, I packed a backpack and readied my horse, preparing for roughly 6 hours of riding. I thought I was the coolest kid, so that day I chose to forego any tack other than the bridle. No saddle, no bareback pad, nothing. Looking back, I'm actually glad that I used to ride this way pretty often, or what was about to happen would have probably caused me serious injury. My horse was always super steady, never afraid, and always took care of the little girl who put all of her faith in him. We were just walking the path, me keeping an eye on his ears, and looking for potential dangers as well. Then he did something he had never ever done before in the woods. He stopped dead in his tracks, head and eyes up, ears strained forward. I heard something lumbering around in the woods, and my first thought is, oh crap, a bear. It wasn't all too uncommon, but it wasn't an everyday occurrence either. So I'm trying to get my horse to go forwards, backwards, to the side, anything, but he's planted his feet. It would have taken a gunshot to get him to listen. I'm yelling, singing, trying to make as much noise as possible to scare the bear back into the trees. Then, I see what's making the noise. It wasn't a bear. It looked like a gorilla, but walked like a human. Bipedal. It looked right at my horse and I. Now I'm pretty tall, and my horse was a full-grown horse. Sitting on his back, the top of my head would have been about 9 feet. This creature was eye level with me. He looked like a football linebacker with a toddler on his shoulders. Huge, blackish brown and hairy. My horse must have caught whatever smell this thing had, because he snorted hard and took off like a rocket. I barely had time to grab his mane before I fell off the side of him. Whatever this creature was, it scared him to the point of a belly-to-the-ground run the entire 3 miles back to the barn. The creature didn't vocalize, and this was before camera phones were big, but I so wish that I had gotten a picture, but it scared my horse to the point that he wouldn't go back into the trailhead for many months. Another experience was about 3 a.m. in the Allegheny Mountains near the New York-Pennsylvania border. I ran into a smaller creature, possibly female, because she made a very light purring, for lack of a better word. It was more of a rumble when I noticed she was there, and she kind of squeaked in terror, like she didn't mean to scare me. I definitely recommend visiting Allegheny if you ever get a chance. The local lore is fascinating, and the Indian reservation it's on is very, very rich in history. There are 2 museums in the park itself, plus a Native American history museum in the town. Thanks again. Let me know if you would like any more stories. I think I've got one for pretty much everything except the black-eyed children. Holly. Our next story comes from Mitch and Nicole, and they call their story The Demon We Call Spot. Nicole says, "Hi, my husband and I are new listeners to your show. So far we really enjoy it, and hope we hear more and wish you much success on your podcast. Our story happened in Middleburg, Florida, in 2009. We had a roommate who was heavily into the occult. Days before our terrifying experience, she and a handful of friends went to the woods and performed some kind of ritual. I'm not really into Wiccan or pagan things, so I have no idea what it was or what it was for. All I know is she returned home excited that everything went well, and she sat an old stump on the coffee table and said she found it in the woods where they had done their ritual. I thought nothing of it. I went on about my business. My husband went to work, and my roommate was out one night. I decided to go to the back patio to have a cigarette. We had a sliding glass door, and I'd always leave it open about 6 or so inches. I'm smoking, nearly done with it, and I'm looking at the cats inside. They're all watching me. Suddenly, the glass door slams and locks. I get up and try desperately to get back in, but to no avail. At the time, I didn't think of anything paranormal being the reason why I was locked out. Not sure what I was thinking, to be honest. Maybe the cat shut it, although looking back, that's highly unlikely. I was just upset that I had no phone and no way to let anyone know what had happened. We lived in kind of a rural area, but I didn't know any of the neighbors, and most of them were shady types anyway, so I never interacted with them. I sat outside for 6 hours until my husband finally returned home. I was not happy, but just brushed it off as my luck and carried on. About 3 or 4 days later is when we had a visitor, an unwelcomed one. It was sometime between 2:30 and 3 a.m. My husband was sitting at the computer in the adjacent room. He was on a program trying to come up with a logo or design for a new band he was in. He wanted a somewhat Christian theme, as he has always been someone with a strong Christian faith. He was piecing together a circle with various crucifixes, just playing around with different looks. He hears someone talking in the living room. Our roommate was gone at the time. She had recently separated from her boyfriend. The voices he heard was the voices of our roommate and her ex. Confused as to why they were home, and so late, and on top of that, why they were together, he went in to say hello, and when he got to the living room, no one was there. Lights were out, dark and empty. He got a chill and a dreadful feeling that something wasn't right. I had to be at work early, sometime around 5 or 6 a.m., and I had been asleep during the time he heard the voices. I had had a dream that I was looking into this black pit, and suddenly looking up at me was this man who was reaching for me, screaming for help. He had the look of pure agony on his face. I very vividly remember his face, his arms, and the upper part of his body. It's like I dreamed it last night, that I remembered it so vividly. His skin was reddish-brown, from the glow of a fire. His skin was melting off and flaking away from his face. I could see the bright, smoldering embers beneath his skin. I could smell the pungent scent of hair and flesh burning. Though I never actually smelled a human burning, I for some reason know that that's exactly what it would smell like. I could see ashes and smoke coming off of him as he looked at me, screaming at me to let him free. I watched him burn, and I was stuck. Nothing I could do but just look at him. Suddenly, I'm awakened by my husband, who was in a very obvious panic. He was shaken and visibly afraid and disturbed. I instantly remembered my dream in every detail. I felt a rush of dread and fear run across me, and my blood ran cold. I sat up on my bed. My husband was telling me about what had just happened to him. I relayed my dream to him in return, and we were so scared we didn't know what to do. We knew something was there. We didn't know what, but it was in the other room. The roommate had a dog who she kept in a kennel at night. She never allowed us to take her out, unless it was to use the bathroom. She was very, very particular about this dog. Suddenly, we hear the dog whimpering and yelping, like something was hurting it. I panicked and wanted to help, but my husband forced me down and was staring at the wall. He was seeing something. He said it was like a vision, but not a vision. He could clearly see the figure in the other room, as if it were showing him what was happening. My husband said that he could see it, as if he were right there. It was about 5 to 6 feet tall. It was black, so black that you could see it on the blackest night. Just abyss black. He's never seen anything so dark before. He said it had the look of almost like how the Grim Reaper is portrayed. It looked at him, and he saw piercing red eyes looking back. It was moving toward the dog, not walking but sort of hovering or gliding. The dog still yelping and whimpering. I was so scared. I know people will be mad that we didn't help the dog, but we were so scared. We were so scared that I couldn't move, even if we wanted to. The dog finally stopped. We heard her moving around in the kennel, so we knew she was unharmed. Probably just as panicked as we were. We had a Bible by the bed. The thing stood there just gazing at us. It was then, around the corner, I saw it. Same as my husband saw. I didn't see it as fully as he did, but I saw the black mass and the deep red eyes. We picked the Bible up, and I began reading passages. My husband found something and quickly put together a makeshift crucifix. The louder we got, the louder it got. It sounded as if it were tearing the house apart, banging on the dishes, walls, counters, just absolutely making as much noise as it could. We decided we would focus on the front door, that was a good 100 feet or so away from us. We had to make it out through the hallway. We wondered if we should go through the window, but the window wouldn't open. We said prayers, and we darted out as fast as we could. I looked to the dog's kennel and saw her lying there. She was okay. I know deep in my heart she was going to be okay. It seemed like his truck was 100 miles away. We felt this thing on us. The darkness and the evil vibe was so thick that you could cut it. We jumped in the truck and sped off as fast as we could. The remainder of the night we slept in the truck. When daylight hit, we went to the closest pawn shop and pawned my husband's guitar to get a hotel room until we could figure out what we were going to do. After trying to rest and discussing our next move, we decided to go back to the house. We didn't have family here, and only one friend who could let us stay with him. We really had no choice but to return until we could get the money to move back to our hometown that was 600 miles away. The first few days were uneventful. Then, one night around 3 a.m., we started hearing noises again. We would hear our roommate, but she wasn't home. It was like whatever it was would mimic her. It loved to mimic. We didn't get nearly as close to the violent outburst like the first night, but we would hear a few thumps and thuds, voices and random noises that couldn't be explained. Lots of mimicking. One morning I was making pancakes, and my husband was standing next to me eating his, and he heard my roommate laugh in his ear, but she wasn't there. Then something knocked the plates out of his hand. He could tell it was getting stronger, and started to mess with us more. We finally borrowed some money from a family member, and we very quickly moved out. We came back a few months later to get some things we had left behind, and as soon as we pulled into the driveway, we would feel the intensity of whatever evil was lurking around. As I said before, it loved to mimic voices, mostly that of our roommate. The next mimic was very odd, though. My husband decided to get a video as we were packing our remaining items. He replayed the video and saw me walk in front of the camera. He was shaken to the core because I was nowhere near him at the time. I was in a back room packing. It was so disturbing to watch. At the time, we didn't have laptops or SD cards or social media, and eventually his phone was lost or messed up, and we lost the video. We gathered our stuff, and we got out again as fast as we could. We never ever returned. After we got back home, we spoke to our old roommate on a few occasions, and then suddenly, she disappeared. She told us she had blood clots and wasn't doing well, and was very ill. We were very worried. We tried contacting her ex and some of her friends who hadn't heard from her either. They were as puzzled as we were. She had family in another country, and we assumed that she may have moved home. We never knew what happened. About 5 years later, she showed up on the suggested friends list on Facebook. I added her and we chatted some, and she refused to talk about anything about why she disappeared. It was odd. I never pushed her any further. Who knows what experiences she had then? She is okay now and has a beautiful family, and from what I know, she doesn't dabble in the occult any longer. Her dog is okay too. She has a great life. She no longer lives in that house or near that area. That's our story, and I know it sounds crazy and maybe even a little all over the place. I apologize. I tried to keep it as accurate and detailed as I remember the events that unfolded. We never could figure out what it was or where it came from, but it was not a good entity. Without knowing what it was, and trying to heal from this experience, we decided to name it Spot. Funny name for a terrifying experience, we know, but we were basically alone in all of this. Only 1 or 2 people would even believe us. Our faith has strengthened since then, and we look at so many things differently now. We tried to tell a few people, but they just laughed at us, accused us of drug use, or said we were just plain lying. We know what we saw and experienced, and it's as real as you and I. We never drank or took drugs during any of this. It was real, and it was scary as hell. Thank you for reading, and if you decide to share this on your show, we thank you for that as well. Mitch and Nicole. Thank you again to Skylar, Jesse, Ivy, Holly, and Mitch and Nicole for writing in and sharing your stories with all of us. Remember that if you have a story that you'd like to share, all you have to do is email me. No matter how strange or unbelievable you think it may sound, if you experienced it, I'd like to hear about it. You can always contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit paranormal-mysteries.com and share your story there. You can get involved by joining our forum and by following us on social media. If you'd like to support the show, you're supporting it right now just by listening, and we appreciate it very much. You can also help support the show by sharing it with your friends. You can also visit patreon.com/paranormalmysteries and become a patron and support us there too. New episodes are available on all of your favorite podcast apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. From all of us at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.